He shouldn't have made it through the night. A woman, burned, bound, barely breathing, lay under the punishing Mojave sun, her body broken, her spirit flickering like a candle in the wind. Her wrists were raw and torn, her lips too cracked to cry for help. And yet, beside her, something moved. Not the rumble of a truck, not a rescuer's voice, but a dog. A German shepherd. His name was Thor. From the far edge of the dunes, he stood guard, perfectly still, a sentinel shaped from courage itself. It was as if something beyond instinct had called him there. As though heaven itself had whispered a single word in his ear, go. What followed wasn't simply a rescue. It was redemption, the kind of miracle that only reveals itself where grace meets grit, and faith refuses to die. Because Thor didn't just find her. He chose her. And that choice would uncover evil, restore a child's smile, and remind a weary world that faith can still breathe among ashes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe dogs are angels in disguise, hit subscribe and type Amen. Because in this story, no one gets left behind when love leads the way. The Mojave sun rose without mercy over the outskirts of Silver Hollow, a forgotten border town clinging to life in southern Nevada. Its cracked roads and silent motels looked as though the earth itself had stopped trying. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the smell of rust, sage, and time that had long since run out. Beyond the last gas station and faded signs, the land fell into a silence so complete it could make a man forget the sound of his own thoughts, until something finally broke it. Staff Sergeant Colton Ror adjusted the bill of his worn olive boonie hat as he scanned the barren horizon. He was 35, tall, broad-shouldered, and cut from the same stone as the desert mountains that hemmed the town in. His hands were marked with calluses, his skin darkened by years beneath a sun that didn't forgive. There was kindness in the creases around his eyes, but only if you looked long enough to see it. He carried himself like a man who'd seen more graves than sunsets. The kind who didn't need to say much because silence had already said it all. Beside him strode Thor, his 6-year-old German shepherd, a powerhouse of sinew and soul, his black saddled back glinting faintly beneath the light. His amber eyes reflected intelligence, not just obedience, but thought. Thor's gait was smooth and deliberate, his movements silent as the wind. He rarely barked. When he did, it meant something. Together, they rode in an old military jeep that rattled along a forgotten gravel path, a scar across the desert. The engine hummed beneath the still air. A rifle was strapped to the roll cage, a dented thermos sat by the dash, and a battered backpack lay behind the seat. It was a route they'd driven 100 times. Nothing ever happened here, until something always did. As the trail narrowed into a dry wash, Thor's body went rigid. His ears pricked, his nose lifted, then he stopped cold. Ror slowed the jeep, killed the engine. Silence pressed down like weight. "What is it, boy?" he asked quietly. Thor didn't bark. He growled, a low, rumbling sound that wasn't warning so much as mourning, a sound Ror knew too well. He grabbed his father's old boonie hat from the dash, edges frayed, sweat-stained, a relic from a man who'd once patrolled this same border and never returned from his final shift. Heat shimmered around them, distorting the horizon. Thor lunged forward suddenly, nose close to the ground, muscles taut. Ror followed, his boots crunching over gravel and cracked earth. The air smelled of dust and iron. Then Thor stopped again, his tail rigid, his chest rising fast. A sharp bark tore through the silence. Ror's stomach dropped. He quickened his pace, and saw what Thor had found. There, half hidden by a jagged rock column, was a woman. She was tied to the stone, wrists bound tight behind her back with strips of plastic cord that had cut deep into blistered skin. Her feet were bare, pressed into the scalding ground. Her dress, once white, hung in tatters, clinging to her sunburned frame. Her skin was cracked and peeling, her lips caked with blood. She wasn't gone, not yet, but close. Ror dropped to his knees beside her, the heat radiating through his uniform. "Ma'am," he said softly but firmly. "Can you hear me?" Her head shifted, just enough for him to see her face, tangled chestnut hair matted with sweat and sand. She was young, early 30s maybe, the kind of face that might once have smiled easily. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Water," she rasped. Ror unhooked his canteen and tilted it gently toward her mouth. She choked, swallowed, then shuddered as if her body was finally remembering what life felt like. He sliced through the cords with his knife. The plastic gave way. Angry red marks ringed her wrists. When the last restraint fell, she slumped forward into his arms. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe now." Her lips moved again. Barely sound. Then. "My son." Ror froze. "Your son." She nodded weakly. "He's still in the car. He's 6, his name's Eli." "Where?" Ror pressed, his voice steady but urgent. Her trembling hand lifted, pointing weakly toward the ridge. "Blue SUV, out of gas." He eased her down gently, using his jacket as a cover. Then turned to Thor. "Find the car, boy. Find the kid." Thor didn't wait for another word. He shot off into the distance, a streak of motion and purpose. Ror raised his radio to his mouth. "This is Ror. Female victim alive, needs immediate evac. Possible child in danger. Coordinates incoming." Thor's bark echoed faintly through the canyon, one, then another, faster this time. Urgent. The desert, once dead silent, now felt alive, as though hope itself had started to breathe again. The desert wind shifted again, hot, dry, and heavy with dust. It whispered through the brush, carrying faint echoes of Thor's distant barking. Ror moved fast, his boots sinking into the loose sand as he followed the sound. Every second mattered. The sun was climbing, turning the Mojave into a furnace. Thor's barks grew louder, then fell silent. Ror rounded the ridge, his pulse hammering. There, half buried in sand, leaning awkwardly against a patch of scrub, was a faded blue SUV. Its rear tire was flat, its windows coated with grime, the passenger door half open. Thor stood beside it, still and tense, his gaze locked on the back of the vehicle. Ror approached cautiously. "Anything, boy." Thor didn't move. His ears flicked forward, eyes unblinking. Then, from inside the SUV, came a faint, broken sound, a small whimper. Not pain. Fear. Ror yanked open the back hatch. A rank odor of dust and stale air spilled out, and beneath a pile of torn blankets and a deflated beach ball, something stirred. A little boy. His cheeks were streaked with dirt, his lips cracked and pale. His blonde hair clung in sweaty clumps to his forehead. Wide, blue eyes, the same eyes as his mother's, stared back at Ror, confused and afraid. The boy clutched a small, worn teddy bear to his chest, one button eye missing, an ear crudely stitched back on with mismatched thread. "Eli?" Ror asked gently, lowering his voice to a calm whisper. The boy shrank further back, hugging the bear tighter, his small shoulders trembling. Ror set his rifle aside, removed his boonie hat, and placed it on the ground beside the open hatch. "It's okay, buddy," he said. "Your mom sent me. She's safe now. You hear me? You're safe too." Thor moved closer, slow and deliberate, then sat down beside Ror, his body relaxed, tongue out, gaze soft. Eli's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to the man. His lips trembled. "Mom," he croaked. "She's okay," Ror said quietly. "She's waiting for you. Let's go see her." Eli hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Ror reached in slowly, his movement steady, deliberate. He slid one arm under the boy's back, the other beneath his legs, and lifted him into his chest. Eli stiffened at first, clutching his teddy bear like armor. But then his little hands relaxed against Ror's uniform, gripping the fabric as if afraid he might vanish. "My bear's name is Tank," he whispered, voice dry as the sand. Ror smiled faintly. "That's a good name. You holding him tight?" Eli nodded against his shoulder. "Yeah. He's a soldier, like you." Ror swallowed hard. "Then we'll make sure you both get home, soldier." Thor trotted ahead as they began to climb back toward the ridge. The heat shimmered across the land, each step sinking into the sand like walking through memory itself. The boy's breathing slowed, his head resting against Ror's chest. Ror kept his pace steady, one boot after another, the sound of grit and heartbeats filling the silence. When they reached the outcrop, Ror's heart sank. Angela, the woman he'd rescued, was no longer sitting up. She lay motionless now, one arm draped across her stomach, her face tilted toward the sky. Her skin was red and dry, lips slightly parted, breath faint and ragged. "Angela!" Ror called, quickening his steps. No response. He dropped to his knees beside her, pressing two fingers to her neck. A pulse, faint. Weak. But still there. Her chest rose, shallow and uneven. The heat had drained what little strength she had left. Ror set Eli down beside her, his voice steady but low. "Stay close to her, okay?" The boy knelt beside his mother, placing his tiny hand on her burned arm. "Mommy," he whimpered. Angela's eyelids fluttered. Her lips barely moved. "Eli, baby." And then she fell still again, slipping back into unconsciousness. Ror grabbed his radio, his tone sharp and urgent. "This is Ror, 2 victims located. Adult female unresponsive, child conscious but dehydrated. Request immediate medical evac. Coordinates transmitting now. Repeat, immediate evac required." Static hissed through the receiver. He adjusted the dial until a faint acknowledgement broke through. Rescue was coming, but out here, even minutes felt like forever. Eli stared at his mother, his lower lip trembling. "She's gonna be okay, right?" Ror looked at him, those blue eyes, too young for fear like this, and shook his head softly. "We'll do everything we can, son." He unscrewed his canteen, poured a little water into his palm, and offered it to the boy. "Here. Sip first. Then we'll help her together." Thor circled once, then lay down beside Angela, curling his body against her side as though shielding her from the burning sun. His fur shimmered with dust, but his eyes stayed open, watchful. Ror shaded his eyes and looked toward the horizon. Nothing but heat haze. Then, faintly, a flash of silver. Dust rising. The unmistakable chop of blades cutting the air. A helicopter. Relief didn't rush in all at once, it came slowly, like cool air after fever. But it was enough. For the first time that day, Ror let out a long breath. They were going to make it. The medevac chopper tore through the Mojave air, its blades thundering like the heartbeat of salvation. Inside, Ror sat near the open hatch, holding Eli tight in his arms. The boy clung to his vest, small fingers tangled in the fabric. His head rested against Ror's shoulder, eyes half closed, Tank the teddy bear wedged between them. Across the cabin, Angela lay strapped to a stretcher, covered in emergency blankets. 4 lines taped to her arms glinted under the cabin light. Her chest rose in shallow but steady rhythm. A medic named Thomas Heller, late 20s, lean and focused, worked over her with quiet precision. He adjusted the 4, checked her pulse, and made quick notes without looking up. His face was calm, the kind of calm that only comes from too many close calls. Thor sat at Ror's feet, crouched low, his ears pressed back against the roar of the rotors. His fur was streaked with dust and blood, a few scratches marking his flank, but his eyes never left Angela. He watched every breath she took. The flight to Silver Hollow Regional Hospital took barely 20 minutes, but it felt longer. Time stretched thin, every vibration of the blades another prayer. When they touched down on the rooftop pad, paramedics were already waiting. Angela was rolled out first, her stretcher secured with straps. Ror followed close behind, still carrying Eli, who had finally fallen asleep. Inside, the hospital air was cold, painfully clean after the desert's heat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and sterile. A nurse named Leslie Grant met them at the emergency intake, early 40s, strong build, hair tied back, face marked by both kindness and fatigue. "This way," she said, her voice brisk but warm. "Room 312. Doctor's waiting." She gave Thor a quick glance, surprise flickering across her face at the sight of a dust-covered German shepherd walking like a soldier through her ER. But she said nothing. Ror followed as they wheeled Angela down the corridor. Eli stirred slightly in his arms but didn't wake. When they reached the treatment room, a doctor, Dr. Adrian Haynes, tall, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed, stepped forward. His tone carried authority softened by years of compassion. "She's critical but stable for now," he said, already checking her vitals. "Let's keep her hydrated, for fluids, and monitor for infection." Ror nodded, standing aside as the team surrounded Angela's bed. He lowered himself into a nearby chair, Eli still in his arms. The boy's breathing was soft, steady now. Thor sat beside them, one paw resting lightly on Eli's boot, a silent promise that the nightmare was over. Nearly an hour passed before Dr. Haynes returned. He removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. "She's stable," he said finally. "Severe dehydration, sunburn, and rope injuries, but she'll live. She's stronger than she looks." Ror exhaled. "Can I see her?" Haynes hesitated, then nodded. "She's awake, weak, but aware. Keep it brief." Ror stood, adjusted his vest, and handed Eli to a nurse. "Stay with Thor, buddy. I'll be right back." Eli nodded sleepily, his small hand still clutching the teddy bear. The hallway outside room 312 was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the air vents and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. Ror paused at the doorway, resting his palm against the frame. He took a breath before stepping inside. Angela lay beneath a thin white blanket, and Thor dripping beside her bed. Her hair had been washed, now damp and fanned across the pillow. Even pale and worn, there was something dignified in her stillness, a quiet strength that refused to fade. When she turned her head, her cracked lips curved faintly. "Colton," she rasped. Ror pulled a chair closer and sat beside her. "You're safe now. Eli's safe too. He's with the nurses down the hall." Relief softened her eyes. "I thought we wouldn't make it," she whispered. "You almost didn't," Ror replied, his voice low, his words more fact than comfort. Angela Mayfield had the kind of beauty shaped not by perfection but by endurance, a soul that had weathered too much and still found the courage to look up. There was a wisdom in her expression, like someone who'd stared down darkness before and refused to blink. "I need you to rest," Ror said. "The medic said you've been through hell." Her gaze drifted toward the ceiling. "It wasn't hell," she murmured. "Hell would have been not seeing him again." Ror stayed silent, knowing that some words didn't need replies. After a few breaths, she spoke again, haltingly, as if each memory cut its way back to the surface. "I thought he had changed," she said, voice cracking. "Clay told me he missed Eli. Said he wanted to help us. Said he was sorry." She shook her head, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes. "But it was all a lie. He never meant to make things right. He just wanted control again." Ror leaned forward. "What did he do?" Angela's voice broke. "He drugged me. I was halfway through my coffee when I blacked out. When I woke up, I was tied in the SUV. I could hear Eli crying, but I couldn't move." Ror's jaw tightened, anger simmering behind his steady expression. "You're telling me he planned it, all of it?" She nodded weakly. He said no one would ever find me. Said I was, dead weight. He told me I'd learn what it felt like to disappear. Her hand trembled as she touched the gauze around her wrist. He dragged me out first. Eli was still asleep in the car. I screamed until my throat bled. They laughed. Ror's knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists. Angela, this wasn't random, he said quietly. We've been tracking cases like yours, abductions that cross state lines. He's not working alone. Her eyes widened. You think he's part of something bigger? I think you're the first one who survived long enough to tell us, Ror replied. Before she could answer, the door creaked open. A nurse stepped in, young, maybe late 20s, chestnut hair tucked neatly beneath a surgical cap. Her skin was pale, her smile too polite. She pushed a tray with gauze and syringes. Time for medication, she said softly. Angela shifted uncomfortably on the bed. Ror stood immediately. What's your name? He asked. Claire, the woman said after a pause. Just transferred here from Prescott Medical. Ror's gaze hardened. That so? She smiled again, too quickly this time. From the hallway came the faint click of claws. Thor padded in through the cracked door, tail low, eyes alert. The shepherd stopped mid-step, gaze locking onto the nurse. His ears pinned back. Then, a growl, low, rising, deliberate. Angela's pulse monitor began to beat faster. Ror's voice dropped an octave. What's in the syringe? Antibiotic, the nurse replied, too fast, too firm. Thor's growl deepened, the hair along his spine standing on end. Angela's eyes went wide. That's not Leslie, she whispered. The nurse's mask of calm broke. The tray slipped from her hands, syringes clattering against the tile. Her right hand darted to her waistband. But she wasn't fast enough. Thor lunged, a blur of motion and muscle. His teeth clamped down on her forearm, not to tear, but to hold. She screamed, twisting as Ror rushed forward, grabbing her wrist and slamming her arm to the ground. A thin silver blade clattered free from beneath her sleeve. Hospital security stormed in seconds later, subduing her as she kicked and spat. Her scrubs were standard issue, but her shoes were wrong. Too new. Too clean. A guard found a burner phone hidden inside her shoe. The last message read. Target still alive. Finish inside. Ror stood over her, chest heaving. Thor remained beside him, silent now, eyes burning like amber glass. Angela lay frozen, her heart monitor still racing. Ror leaned over her bed. You were right to be afraid, he said quietly. Angela's gaze met his, weak, but fierce. No, she whispered. I was right to fight. The next morning, Silver Hollow looked different. The wind had lost its voice, no longer whispering, but scraping, carrying fine dust through the empty streets. The sun rose behind a haze of copper light, painting the desert in shades of brass and bone. Ror stood outside the hospital's south parking lot, a plastic evidence bag in his gloved hand. Inside, the burner phone sat cracked and silent, a black key to something much darker. Thor sat beside him, tail still, gaze fixed on the horizon. A man approached from behind, boots crunching softly on gravel. Special Agent Carson Long, FBI. He was in his early 40s, with the same rigid posture Ror recognized from years in uniform. His jaw was square, his expression carved from discipline. The yellow letters of FBI on his jacket were dust-stained, half-faded by sun and sand. I heard your dog sniffed out a blade before it hit anyone, Carson said. Ror didn't turn. He's not my dog. He's my partner. And yeah, she was going for the jugular. Carson gave a short, approving nod. You did good. So did he. He reached for the evidence bag. Standard burner. Basic encryption. We'll break it. I want in, Ror said flatly. Carson raised a brow. You're Marines, not Bureau. She's not just another civilian, Carson. And that kid, he's seen enough to last a lifetime. I'm not walking away. After a long pause, Carson sighed. Fine. You stick close. You follow orders. And the dog doesn't bite unless I say so. Thor gave a quiet chuff, almost like a laugh. Carson cracked a half-smile. Yeah, I'll take that as agreement. Inside the hospital, Angela was sitting up now. The color had returned to her cheeks, though the gauze still wrapped her arms. Her voice was steadier, her gaze sharp. Ror entered quietly, pulling up a chair. They traced the phone, he said. Looks like we've got a lead. Angela's fingers fidgeted with the edge of her blanket. I owe you the truth, she murmured. Ror didn't speak. He waited. Angela took a slow breath. I met Clay 3 years ago. He was charming at first, patient, gentle. He knew how to make me feel safe. Brought Eli toys, fixed my car, talked about family. Her voice faltered. But after a few months, something changed. He started controlling everything. Who I spoke to. Where I went. He'd take my phone, say it was for protection. Then one day, he hit me. Ror said nothing. He let her continue. I left. I took Eli. Changed towns twice. I thought we were free. She swallowed hard. But then Eli started having nightmares. Said there was a man with no eyes watching him. No eyes? Ror repeated quietly. Angela nodded. That's what he said. That's how he saw Clay. Said he couldn't see himself in him anymore. Ror scribbled the phrase in his notepad, a detail that mattered more than it seemed. Last month, Angela continued, he emailed me from a new address. Said he'd changed. Wanted to meet in public. I shouldn't have gone, but Eli missed his dad. Her eyes glistened. The coffee was waiting when I arrived. He smiled, said he'd already ordered for me. I drank it. That's the last thing I remember. You're not to blame, Ror said softly. Angela nodded weakly, looking out the window. You said there's a lead. Yeah, Ror said, standing. The phone pinged near a dry canyon southwest of here. Thor picked up a scent 2 miles out. Carson and I are heading there now. She met his eyes. Be careful. Clay's clever. He knows how to disappear. Ror nodded once. So do I. By late afternoon, the desert sky had turned a bruised shade of gold, and the wind carried the smell of heat and copper dust. Ror tightened the straps on his Kevlar vest and checked the magazine in his sidearm. Beside him, Agent Carson Long studied a digital map glowing faintly on his tablet. The two men stood at the rim of a dry canyon, a deep, cracked scar running through the Mojave's spine. The terrain stretched endlessly, jagged and empty, save for scattered sagebrush and the occasional sun-bleached bone half buried in sand. Thor stood at Ror's side, tail stiff, nose working the wind. This is where the signal last pinged, Carson said, lowering the tablet. Nothing but wilderness for 20 miles. You sure about this? Ror scanned the horizon. I'm sure. Carson adjusted his earpiece. All right, Sergeant. Let's move. They started down the slope. The sun had begun its slow descent, bleeding light across the cliffs and painting the rocks in molten hues of red and amber. Thor led the way, pausing occasionally to sniff the air, his paws silent on the uneven ground. The only sounds were their breaths and the soft rattle of gear. For nearly a mile they walked, down the narrow gully, across dry streambeds, over boulders that looked like fossilized waves. Then Thor froze. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. His ears pricked forward. He turned sharply left and barked once, loud and certain. Got something, Ror said. Carson raised his rifle and followed as Thor veered off the path, weaving through two towering slabs of sandstone. The temperature dropped suddenly. The air grew heavier. Ahead, half hidden in the shadow of a rock wall, was a small opening, a cave. Not naturally formed, but cut. The edges were rough, uneven, clawed out of the stone with crude tools. Thor sniffed the entrance, then stepped back, growling softly. Ror crouched, drawing his flashlight. Stay behind me. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing a narrow tunnel that widened into a hollow chamber. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of sweat, oil, and decay. Someone had been here, recently. Against one wall lay a filthy mattress, stained with sand and old blood. A torn blanket clung to it in twisted folds. Nearby, an empty canteen and a rusted lighter sat beside a pile of cigarette butts. Carson swept the far corner with his flashlight. Jesus, he muttered. A piece of rope hung from a metal hook embedded in the wall, frayed, stretched, and darkened by something long dried. Ror knelt near a small mound of disturbed sand. He brushed it away with his gloved hand, uncovering a cracked flip phone and several strands of long, dark hair tangled with dried blood. He exhaled slowly. She wasn't the only one. Carson crouched beside him, jaw tightening. We've got enough forensics to make a case. Hair, blood, burner phone, all of it. Ror's eyes hardened. No. This isn't just evidence. This is Clay's pattern. He's been using these canyons for years. Carson nodded grimly. Let's bring it home. By nightfall, the winds over Silver Hollow turned restless, swirling with a weight that seemed to warn of what was coming. Dust scraped against the sides of the Bureau SUV as Ror drove down the cracked back road toward the outskirts of town. Angela sat in the back seat, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her bandaged wrists trembled slightly whenever the vehicle jolted. The burns along her neck were healing, but her posture remained guarded, muscles tense beneath the borrowed denim jacket. Beside her, Eli leaned against the window, tracing circles in the fog of his breath with one small finger. Tank, the teddy bear, sat in his lap. Thor occupied the passenger seat, his nose tilted toward the open window, breathing in the storm that was building. At 6 years old, he'd spent more hours in the field than most soldiers. His coat glimmered faintly in the dusk light, and though his body rested, his mind never stopped working. Ror glanced in the rearview mirror. You holding up? He asked. Angela looked out the window. I've been worse, she said softly. Her tone wasn't defiant, just honest. The storm clouds above rolled like smoke, casting the desert in a copper haze. When they finally reached the cabin, a weathered ranger outpost tucked between two old mesquite trees, the first grains of sand were already sweeping across the windshield. The cabin was small and sturdy, built decades ago for Border Patrol agents who needed shelter during desert storms. Ror keyed the lock and pushed the door open. The inside smelled of cedar and dust. A single bunk, a chipped wooden table, a small stove, and a ham radio by the window. Maps of the Mojave covered the far wall, routes, old smuggling trails, red and yellow markers pinning the history of danger across the desert. Angela stepped inside slowly, eyes scanning the walls as though they might still hold ghosts. This place looks like it remembers things, she said quietly. Ror nodded. It does. He turned on a small fan, trying to push the heavy air around. The light outside dimmed as the sandstorm thickened, smearing the world in orange and gray. Eli climbed onto the bunk, clutching Tank to his chest. Angela sat beside him, brushing hair from his forehead. Do you remember the lake house? She whispered. Eli nodded sleepily. Where I fell in the water. Angela smiled faintly. Yeah. You were holding onto my back. I couldn't touch the bottom, but I kicked anyway, until I felt the rocks. You made it, Eli said softly. I did, she murmured, kissing his forehead. And so will we. Across the room, Ror leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching the two of them without speaking. He'd seen 1,000 broken families, but rarely one still fighting to stay whole. The static on the ham radio snapped to life suddenly, breaking the quiet. Ror turned, adjusting the dial. A voice crackled through the interference, faint but distinct. 6 vehicles moving east of marker 47. Possible transport phase. ETA 1 hour. Angela looked up sharply. What does that mean? Ror leaned in, fine-tuning the frequency. The voice came again, clearer now. Convoy confirmed. Location, Ridge Pass Corridor. Suspected trafficking movement. Staging near Iron Cut Trailhead. Repeat, convoy inbound. Angela's face went pale, then tight with realization. They're moving them tonight, she said. They're going to vanish. Ror grabbed a marker and circled the coordinates on the map. We've tracked that route before. It's a known handoff point, but never confirmed. I know it, Angela interrupted. Clay took me there once. He said the canyon walls kept sound from carrying, said no one ever goes up there unless they're invited. Ror looked at her carefully. You're not ready for the field. You need someone who's been there, she shot back. Her voice rose, not in panic, but in urgency. You said yourself the trail's split. You won't know which one leads to the staging area. She stepped closer, trembling but determined. I remember the turns. The rusted sign. The fork that looks like it dead ends but doesn't. I can guide you. Ror hesitated. The storm howled outside, rattling the window frames. Eli looked up from the bunk. Mom. Angela turned to him and managed a small smile. You'll stay here with Thor, okay? At that moment, Thor stood, as if understanding every word, and crossed the cabin to stand beside Angela, tail low but steady. He'll stay with me, she said softly. He knows. Ror looked at the two of them, the woman still healing, the dog ready for war, and sighed. 10 minutes, he said finally. We go in light. Recon only. No engagement unless confirmed. Thor stays close. You step out of line, you're out. Got it? Angela nodded once. Got it. The sandstorm had eased by the time they reached the ridge, leaving the air thick and copper-tinted, like the desert was holding its breath. Visibility stretched barely 100 feet ahead, but Angela's voice guided them through the haze, steady despite the fear etched behind it. That dip up ahead, she said, pointing toward a shallow valley where the road vanished beneath the dunes. That's where the trail bends left, but the real path curves behind the cliff. That's where he'd wait. Ror studied the terrain, then nodded. Keep low. Thor moved first, silent and sure-footed, his black and sable coat blending seamlessly with the swirling dust. He paused every few yards, testing the air, then pressed forward. The sun dipped lower, and the world turned the color of burnt copper. In the distance, the jagged cliffs of Widow's Shelf rose like stone sentinels, tall, sharp, and cruelly shaped by centuries of wind. Shadows clung to their edges, hiding whatever secrets lay within. When they finally reached the ridge, Ror dropped to one knee, scanning the canyon below through his scope. Talk to me, he murmured. Angela lay beside him, her hands shaking slightly as she pointed. There, she whispered. Between those pillars, that's the staging area. Ror adjusted his lens. Through the shifting haze, he could see them now. 2 transport vans idling near the canyon floor. Camo tarps hung across rock formations, creating pockets of darkness. Armed men moved between the vehicles, their movements too smooth, too practiced to be amateurs. But it wasn't the men who made Angela gasp, it was the women. 3 of them. Bound at the wrists, huddled near an outcrop. One leaned limply against the rock, her chin drooping toward her chest. Another stared blankly at the sand. The third, younger, with dark curls and a thin scar running from her ear to her collarbone, lifted her head just enough for Angela to see her face. "Jenny," Angela whispered, her voice cracking. Ror turned to her. "You sure?" Angela nodded, tears forming. She was on the missing posters last spring, a teacher from Los Cruces. She used to volunteer at the same shelter I did. That scar, she told me she got it falling off a bike as a kid. Ror's jaw clenched. He looked back through the scope, and then he saw him. Clay Dorsey. Even from a distance, the man's presence curdled the air. He was tall, lean, built like someone who'd lived too long on adrenaline and cruelty. His hair was longer now, a rough buzz turned to ragged stubble, and his eyes, cold and predatory, scanned the camp like a hawk circling prey. He barked orders, gesturing sharply toward the vans. His posture spoke of control, of command, of someone who'd done this before. Ror pulled back, his expression hard. "That's him." He drew lines in the sand with a stick, the canyon's shape, the vehicle positions, the choke points. Years of military instinct turned raw terrain into strategy. They weren't alone. 10 minutes earlier, Ror had radioed for backup. On the opposite ridge, a four-man tactical team lay in wait, led by Sergeant Micah Vaughn, a tall, calm figure with a scar arcing over his left eyebrow and the unshakable composure of a man who'd seen everything twice. Vaughn's voice crackled softly in Ror's earpiece. "Visual confirmed." "Confirmed," Ror whispered. 3 hostages. Clay Dorsey on site. Multiple armed tangos. "Copy that," Vaughn replied. "Terrain's bad, narrow slope, no clear elevation." "I know," Ror muttered. "We go in silent. Quick entry, hostages first. We take Clay alive." Angela pointed toward the far left corner of the canyon. "There's a tunnel down there," she said quietly. "That's where he kept me before the desert. It connects to another chamber. If they sense trouble, they'll move the women there." "You sure?" Vaughn asked through comms. "I remember the smell," she said. "And the rusted padlock on the gate." Ror met her gaze. "Good work." Thor crouched beside them, his eyes darting, muscles tense. Suddenly, he stiffened, tail low, ears pricked forward. Then came a faint whimper, short and sharp. "What is it?" Vaughn whispered. Thor pawed the ground once, then twice, and stepped back. Ror's face hardened. "Mines," he said quietly. "Pressure plates." Carson's voice came through the radio. "They rigged the path." "Yeah. Low-yield anti-personnel. Enough to cripple a rescue team." Ror reached into his vest, pulled a red flag marker, and planted it beside a nearly invisible wire glinting under the sand. "We go around. East slope only. Avoid the ravine." "Copy that," Vaughn replied. Angela exhaled shakily, realizing how close they'd come. Ror turned to her. "Stay low. We move on my mark." Thor gave a low grunt, a signal they'd rehearsed over years of trust. Ror checked his rifle, clicked the safety off, and nodded once. "Move." The descent into Widow's Shelf was silent and deliberate. Every footstep, every breath felt amplified by the canyon's narrow throat. The wind had died completely, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed against their chests. Ror led from the front, rifle drawn low. Thor followed just behind, moving like a shadow, his paws barely whispering against the sand. His coat shimmered in the dying sunlight, making him look almost carved from flame and stone. On the opposite ridge, Vaughn's team crept into position. 4 men in tactical gear fanned out, rifles steady, each waiting for the signal. Angela crouched behind a boulder with Valerie Min, a petite field medic from Homeland Security who had joined Vaughn's team. Valerie's calm was absolute, her dark eyes focused, her movements efficient. She placed a reassuring hand on Angela's shoulder. "I'll keep you safe," Valerie whispered. "You've done enough." Angela nodded faintly, eyes locked on the canyon below. Down near the staging area, Clay barked another order. Two of his men began dragging the bound women toward the vans. Jenny stumbled, catching herself on the rock before being yanked forward. Ror's knuckles tightened around his rifle. "Not yet," he muttered under his breath. Then, a sound split the silence. Thor barked. It was sharp, commanding, unmistakable, a battle cry in canine form. Every head in the canyon snapped toward the ridge. And in that instant, Vaughn's team struck. A flash grenade arced through the air, exploding with a blinding burst of light. Shouts erupted. Confusion followed. Ror leapt from cover, landing behind a pile of crates, firing controlled bursts. One guard dropped, another fled toward the rocks. Thor raced down the slope, sprinting straight for the women. His paws hit the sand in rhythmic thunder. He lunged between the captives and their handler, teeth bared, growl vibrating through the ground. The man froze, dropping his weapon as Thor stood his ground, unwavering, immovable. Angela bolted from cover, ignoring Valerie's call. She slid down the slope, knife in hand, cutting through the women's bindings. Jenny collapsed into her arms, sobbing. "I thought I was dead," she whispered. "You're not," Angela said, her voice shaking but fierce. "You're not alone anymore." Meanwhile, Clay had vanished into the canyon's shadows. "Dorsey's on the move." Vaughn shouted into comms. "I've got him," Ror replied, already sprinting toward the southern cliff. The chase began, dust and adrenaline blurring into one. Clay moved fast, darting between rocks, scaling the jagged incline like a man who knew every escape route. He ducked under a stone arch, emerging onto a narrow natural bridge, a thin slab of rock spanning two deep ravines. Below, 30 feet of sheer drop onto jagged shale. Ror followed, closing the distance, his boots kicking loose gravel down the slope. "It's over, Clay," he shouted. Clay turned, his eyes wild, his lips curling into a snarl. "You should have stayed out of it, soldier." He drew a Glock from his waistband. But before he could aim, a blur cut through the air. Thor. The shepherd hit him full force, slamming him backward. The gun fired once, a wild shot echoing harmlessly into the canyon. Both man and dog hit the ground hard. Dust exploded around them. When the air cleared, Clay was pinned. Thor stood over him, fangs bared, a low growl rattling his chest. His teeth hovered inches from the man's throat, a warning, not a kill. Ror approached, rifle trained. "Don't move." Clay froze. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. "You don't get to run anymore," Ror said coldly. He holstered his rifle, flipped Clay over, and snapped the cuffs on with precise, practiced motion. Thor stepped aside, his tail rigid, eyes never leaving the man's face. From the ridge above, Vaughn's voice came through the radio. "Hostages secure. Area clear." Ror exhaled slowly, looking toward the horizon, the desert bathed in the amber glow of sunset. They had won. Angela and Jenny were being led out of the canyon, supported by Valerie and two of Vaughn's men. Angela turned once, meeting Ror's eyes through the settling dust. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Because in that silent look, every word, every scar, every unspoken prayer, found its answer. By dawn, the Mojave had changed. The winds that once screamed through the canyons now whispered softly, brushing through the creosote and tumbleweed with the gentleness of forgiveness. The widow's shelf was no longer a place of screams or shadows, only silence and sun, washing over the scars it had held for too long. Ror stood at the canyon's edge, watching as federal agents moved below, combing through the wreckage of Clay Dorsey's operation. The transport vans sat empty now, their tires half buried in dust. Every shackle, every tarp, every trace of evil was being catalogued and packed into evidence crates. Thor sat beside him, head high, tail still. The early light glinted against his coat, streaking gold through sable. Below, Clay was being led away in cuffs. His once cold eyes were now hollow, defeated, the adrenaline drained from his frame. He stumbled once but kept walking, his swagger replaced by silence. Ror didn't look away. He just said, quietly, "You don't get to own another life again." The breeze caught his words and carried them into the desert. Behind him, Angela and Jenny sat under a canvas tent near the medic vehicles. Valerie Min knelt beside them, checking vitals and bandages. Angela's face was streaked with dust and dried tears, but her eyes were steady. Jenny was silent, staring at her wrists as if still feeling the cords that had bound her. Angela reached over, covering her hands. "You're free," she whispered. Jenny nodded faintly, but her gaze didn't lift. Freedom, Angela knew, wasn't a switch, it was a slow, painful bloom that began in the heart before it reached the skin. Ror approached quietly, removing his helmet. "Medics say you'll both be clear for transport soon," he said. Angela looked up at him. "And Clay?" Ror nodded toward the agents loading him into the armored vehicle. "He's done. He'll face everything he's ever hidden from." Angela exhaled, long and slow. "Good." She hesitated, then looked at Thor, who had padded to her side and lowered his head against her knee. Her hand moved automatically to his fur. "He never left me," she murmured. "Not once." Ror smiled faintly. "That's how he's wired." The sun climbed higher, the wind rising with it. Helicopter blades began to churn the air as the convoy prepared for departure. The women would be taken to the nearest trauma center before heading to safe housing across state lines. Angela turned to Ror. "You're going back to Silver Hollow?" "Yeah," he said, adjusting his gear. "There's paperwork. Debrief. The usual mess. And after?" Ror looked at her for a moment, unreadable. "After, we'll see." Thor nudged Angela's hand, then trotted back to the jeep as if to say, "Mission complete." Angela smiled, the first real one in days. "You tell him he's getting steak tonight." Ror smirked. "He already knows." 2 days later, the desert sky stretched blue and clean over Silver Hollow. The wind had lost its bitterness, replaced by the quiet rustle of new beginnings. Ror stood on the hospital roof, watching the sun set over the town. Thor sat beside him, panting lightly, tail brushing against the concrete. In Ror's hand was a small envelope, evidence bag sealed with Clay's name. Inside was a single flash drive recovered from the canyon. The drive had cracked open more than they expected. Dozens of photos. Lists. Locations. Women. Carson Long approached, his usual stiff posture softened by fatigue. He handed Ror a cup of coffee. "The Bureau's making it official," he said. "Dorsey's facing multiple charges, trafficking, conspiracy, murder. His confession links 4 other sites across state lines. The task force is moving now." Ror took a sip. "Good." Angela's statement helped nail him, Carson added. "She gave them everything. Every route, every name she could remember." Ror nodded slowly. "She's tougher than she looks." Carson glanced at Thor. "You both are." He paused, then added, "You sticking around?" Ror looked out across the horizon. "Maybe. Silver Hollow still has ghosts." Carson clapped him once on the shoulder, then walked off. Thor watched him go, then turned his gaze back to the sky. The light hit his eyes just right, 2 golden mirrors reflecting a world finally free of its storm. By the weekend, Angela and Eli were discharged from the hospital. Ror met them outside the main entrance, Thor trotting happily at his heel. Eli ran forward immediately, arms outstretched. "Thor," he shouted, his voice bright and clear for the first time. Thor wagged his tail and bent down, letting the boy bury his face in his fur. Angela followed, slower, her steps still careful but no longer fragile. The sunlight caught her hair, and for the first time, her face didn't look haunted. Just human. Ror nodded at her. You look better. I feel it, she said. They said the burns will fade. The rest might take longer. That's all right, he replied. Scars are proof you made it through. She smiled faintly. That what yours say too? He glanced down at the faint white line running along his forearm, then back up at her. Something like that. Eli tugged at Angela's sleeve. Can we go home now? Angela looked at Ror. We don't really have one anymore. Ror hesitated, then motioned toward his jeep. Then let's find you one. The cabin was small, but it breathed peace. Angela stood barefoot on the porch, jeans cuffed, the desert breeze tangling through her hair. Her skin still bore traces of healing, faint scars ghosting the inside of her wrists. Eli sat on the steps with a crayon and a spiral notebook, sketching with the focus of a soldier on a mission. Ror sat nearby, boots kicked up, sipping coffee while Thor sprawled in the shade, paws crossed like a king at rest. Can I show you something? Eli asked suddenly. Angela smiled. Of course. He held up the notebook. The drawing was crude but beautiful, a large dark dog standing tall, a boy beneath his shadow with arms outstretched. He's keeping me cool, Eli said proudly. So I don't burn again. Angela crouched down, kissed the top of his head. He does that for everyone, she whispered. Inside, Ror poured another mug and handed it to her when she joined him. Steam curled lazily between them. Van called this morning, he said. The raid went national. For more women rescued in New Mexico. Clay's confession opened everything up. Angela looked out over the horizon. How long will he serve? Life. No parole. Multiple jurisdictions. The state's not letting him see daylight again. She exhaled. Good. Thor shifted in the shade, his ears twitching but his body relaxed. Though he wasn't on duty anymore, the vigilance never left his eyes. Angela followed his gaze to the ridge beyond the cabin, the very ridge where she had once been left to die. Now it was quiet. Peaceful. Later that afternoon, she stood at that same spot with a small sapling cradled in her hands, a young Joshua tree, gifted to her by Carla Gomez, the founder of Desert Roots, a nonprofit that helps survivors rebuild their lives. Carla had been through it too. Every scar she carried had become a seed she planted for someone else. It grows slow, Carla had told her. But it grows strong. Ror dug into the dry soil, clearing space near the rock that had once been her prison. Eli stood beside him, gripping a small watering can with both hands, his expression serious. Angela knelt, setting the sapling into the earth. Her fingers pressed the soil down with deliberate care, as if reclaiming something that had once been stolen. When she finished, Thor padded forward and lay down beside the tree, his side pressed gently against its roots. Angela brushed his fur. Thank you, she whispered. For not letting me be forgotten. Thor didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, he closed his eyes and gave a single nod, as if he understood every word. That night, the desert was quiet. Inside the cabin, the light from the small lamp cast a warm glow across the table where Angela sat filling out papers. Ror leaned beside her, reading through a form marked with the letterhead Desert Roots, Outreach and Rehabilitation. They offered me a position, Angela said, almost shyly. Mentorship and advocacy. Helping other women start over. Ror smiled faintly. You'd be good at it. I haven't worked in years. He shook his head. You never stopped working. You just weren't getting paid. Angela laughed quietly, the sound uncertain, but real. On the couch, Eli had fallen asleep, Tank the teddy bear tucked under his chin. Thor lay curled nearby, one paw stretched toward the boy as if guarding his dreams. Outside, the wind carried softly across the desert, stirring the leaves of the newly planted tree. Its silhouette stood tall against the stars, small, fragile, but unbreakable. And where once there had been death and despair, there was now life. Quiet. Steady. Rooted. Because some stories don't end with rescue. They end with rebirth. This story reminds us that even in the darkest corners of life, light can still find a way through. Angela's survival, and the courage of Ror and Thor, are not just acts of strength, but signs of grace. Sometimes, miracles don't come as flashes of lightning. Sometimes they come as a loyal dog, a stranger's kindness, or the quiet strength to keep going when everything tells you to stop. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. And remember, no one gets left behind when love leads the way. Months later, spring found its way back into the Mojave. The desert, once a wasteland of dust and memory, now shimmered beneath soft blue skies. Tiny yellow blooms dotted the sand, and the air carried the faint scent of rain that had fallen miles away. At the edge of Silver Hollow, a small cabin stood steady against the horizon, its porch wrapped in new wood, its windows open to the wind. The scars of the past were still there, but they'd turned into stories instead of wounds. Ror knelt in front of the Joshua tree Angela had planted. It had grown taller since that day, fragile still, but rooted deep, reaching upward with quiet defiance. He brushed the sand away from its base and straightened the small wooden marker Eli had painted himself. In uneven handwriting, it read, "Hope grows here." Behind him, Angela's laughter drifted from the porch. She was hanging laundry in the soft sunlight, her movements calm and unhurried, the rhythm of someone who had finally made peace with the silence. Inside the cabin, Eli was sprawled on the floor beside Thor, coloring in a notebook. He was drawing a marine badge and a paw print side by side, connecting them with a line that formed a heart. Every few minutes, Thor's tail thumped gently against the wood, as though approving the masterpiece. His muzzle had a few more streaks of gray now, and he'd earned every one. When Ror came back inside, Eli jumped up. "Uncle Ror, look," he said proudly, holding up the sketch. Ror smiled. "Looks official. Maybe we'll make it a logo." Eli grinned wide. "For what?" Ror crouched down, looked him in the eye, and said, "For whatever comes next." Angela appeared at the door, drying her hands with a towel. "He's talking about the new program," she said, smiling. Ror nodded. Desert Roots wants to partner with veterans, trauma response, search and rescue support, canine rehab training. They'll need handlers, mentors, people who know what it means to rebuild. Angela glanced down at Thor, whose ears perked up as if he understood. "Then I guess we're already part of it." Ror smirked. "Looks that way." Outside, the sun began to set, bleeding orange across the wide expanse of the Mojave. The desert no longer looked empty, it looked alive. Angela joined Ror on the porch as Eli ran circles around Thor, who tolerated the play with patient dignity. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The wind moved gently, stirring the curtains through the open door. Finally, Angela said quietly, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" Ror took a slow breath, eyes on the horizon. "All the time." "Do you regret it?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not for a second." She looked down, her voice soft but certain. "Then I guess that's how miracles work. You don't plan them, they just find the right people." Ror smiled faintly. "Maybe they find the right dog, too." Thor, hearing his name, lifted his head and barked once, deep, proud, and perfect. The sound echoed across the desert, strong and full of life, carrying through the canyons where once there had been nothing but pain. And somewhere in that echo was the truth of everything that had happened, the pain, the loss, the courage, and the choice to keep moving forward no matter how deep the scars ran. Because sometimes, the heroes don't wear capes or carry medals. Sometimes, they walk on four paws, or hold a child's hand, or dig their fingers into dry soil to plant a single tree that means we survived. And sometimes, that's enough. In the heart of the desert, where silence once buried hope, 3 lives found a reason to rise again, a marine searching for purpose, a mother fighting for her child, and a loyal shepherd who never gave up. We often think miracles arrive as flashes of light, but sometimes they come quietly, wrapped in loyalty, courage, and love. And when we choose to stand, even after the world has broken us, that's when we truly live again.